mindfulness is movement. Like most
Mm-hmm.
people think that mindfulness is stillness.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly that is, but I really do think, to exactly what you said, mindfulness is movement. On the inside, it's letting go, it's making decisions, it's finding clarity, it's growing, and then it's making choices in the world with your body, with your words, with everything. So
Right.
mindfulness is movement. Why not connect it with something that is literal movement in the form of music? So
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. I just had the most inspiring conversation with my friend, Case Kenny, who is an author, a digital creator, mindfulness expert, and the host of the wildly popular podcast, New Mindset, Who Dis, which you might have listened to. But he launched this series in 2018, and he's also got a really insanely popular, I think he has 1 million followers on Instagram, and all kinds of famous, Snoop Dogg is reposting him, Viola Davis is reposting him. It's really interesting to sort of see how much he's blown up. He and I were on a panel together. I think it was in early 2020. And I just really liked what he had to say. So he's really like a relationship expert, but he's a mindfulness expert and makes mindfulness really accessible to the masses. So it's really like a personal growth and mindfulness coach. So I loved having him. I love talking to him. I really hope that you enjoyed this interview with Case Kenny as much as I enjoyed doing it. I am so excited to welcome Case Kenny to the Terri Cole Show. Welcome, Case.
hi there. Thanks for having me.
Super fun. We were just talking while we were off camera about where did we even know each other from? Because we know we came into each other's lives a couple of years ago, and we've stayed connected through social. And I think we did a panel together a bunch of years ago during the beginning of the pandemic. And both of us agreed that the best thing that came out of the panel was meeting each other. So here we are, finally on the show. All right, so let's talk about, give us an idea of how the podcast started and why you started the podcast.
Everything started with the podcast. Like, I never really had any inclination to get into the wellness space or to become someone who gives advice, even though I don't really see it that way. In fact, I was always kind of skeptical of self-development or wellness. So I'm 35 now. So when I started this, when I was 29, I was kind of skeptical, single. Who are people to tell me what to do with my life? Inspirational quotes are silly. Anything cliche is not for me. A word like mindfulness is for other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would hear things like vibrations and chakras and frequencies or therapy or, attachment styles. I'm like, that just can't possibly be for me because I'm a regular freaking guy. So just for context, that's kind of how I always felt. But I did start the podcast kind of out of nowhere because when I was about 29, I was doing really well in my career. I led a sales team for a long time, worked in advertising for about 12 years. And I really liked who I had become this type A guy. I led a sales team. I was a manager. I was making good money. It was great. And I like that because I was like, man, I like who I've become. I'm confident. I could take clients out to dinner and schmooze them. I know what to do. There's a blueprint. But alongside of that, it did not feel the same on the inside. Like I felt like there were two versions of me, outside Case and inside Case. Outside Case was that guy. Inside Case, though, was definitely insecure, definitely copying and pasting a lot of things in life, borrowing, doing all these things. And I just did not like that feeling. And I'd always been a somewhat creative guy. I've always had an aspiration to write. So I was like, what can I do to kind of figure this out? I started the podcast in direct response to kind of that frustration of being different versions of myself. And I was just like, I'm going to do this podcast because at the time in 2018, podcasting was a bit more nascent. And I saw it as a really vulnerable way to force myself to have a perspective. So I just started the podcast, 15, 20-minute episodes where I would take a topic or a question and I would just force myself, mostly through the lens of logic and question and answer, to like force myself to have a perspective that was mine, not one that necessarily sounded good or that I borrowed from other people, but my own. The rest is history, I suppose. Really what I realized I was doing, I was practicing a very practical form of mindfulness, of self-therapy, of putting my feelings on trial. And I think just speaking out loud, vocalizing it really helped. And that was 6 years ago. And here we are now.
What's so interesting about who you attract because of the pod and because of your social media presence, which we're also going to talk about, but it's like the part of you that didn't like the stuff that was already out there or seemed pat or seemed like trite or cliche. I think people are really attracted to your work, and I know that I am attracted to your work because you really do think outside the box. What you're saying is not what everyone is saying. You're giving people permission in the language, and those of you listening or watching, if you're familiar with Case's work, then you know what I'm talking about. And you actually have a lot of fancy people. Like, it's funny, even after I started following you, then I was like, I think Viola Davis just reposted Case. Like, what is going on? So how has that been for you, having your social, this presence, like really resonating with so many people and with famous people too, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. Fancy, famous people. It's all great. I mean, like Viola will share it, and then Snoop Dogg will share it, and then a clinical psychologist will share it. It's like really cool to see people from culture or academia share these things. And I mean, I've matured a lot over the years for one, and I've really come around to, I think, any form of wellness, advice, perspective, live and learn is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the past there was a bit of ego speaking of like, who is this person to give advice? So I've really come around there, but I have come around even more so to the idea of like a cliche, like a truth. Like there's a reason cliches are cliches because there's truth in them.
Totally.
And I think it's my job to voice truths in practical ways, meet people where they are in language that we can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps that's why a lot of people like to share it, because it's not necessarily, fancy words or therapy language, which of course is helpful, but it's just regular everyday language to help people do one thing. I'm a grown man who writes inspirational quotes on the internet. Sometimes it's like the funniest thing. But the reason I do it is because I think a lot of people, when it comes to like mindfulness or wellness, right, we think that it's all about understanding yourself, listening to yourself, being present in yourself, understanding your past and all these things. And I say, absolutely. That's a huge part of becoming and evolving and growing and healing, listening to yourself, understanding where pain or frustration is coming from. But I really have realized that that's half the battle. The other half is talking to yourself. I think if we only listen to ourselves, and I love your perspective too, but I think we can get in a slippery slope where we're just ruminating and we're sitting in these things. And I tell you for a fact, if I only listen to myself, there's a lot of garbage up there. There's a lot of unfair, untrue things. And I'm an optimistic guy, but if I turn the lights off and I just listen, it is not very pleasant up there sometimes. So I think we have to learn how to talk back to ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's why I like to give people little 12-word, 10-word, 6-word things that they can keep in their pocket. So on those days where their thoughts, they're listening to them, but they're not saying good things, they can say, nope, hold up. And they could say something kind or affirming to themselves.
Right.
Such a simple thing, but I really do think that's my job in life, with some of the talents I've been given and that I've nurtured, is relatable anecdotes about life that are true and uplifting. I like to uplift people. I know there's a lot of people in wellness who like to, talk about all the dark things, and that's
Right.
so great that some people are tackling those things, but I like to spread the light.
Yeah.
If I could do that on social media, the podcast, then I'm a happy guy.
Right on. It's funny. Do you know Dr. Daniel Amen? He's like a brain expert, right?
Yeah.
He's great. And he says something very much to what you were just saying about, he learned this, I guess, when he was in school to become a psychiatrist, that he had a teacher who said, don't believe every stupid thought that you think.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're not all real and they're not all helpful. And yet what I really find, Case, with your stuff that you put out there is that it's accessible. I agree with you. But why I'm drawn to it so much is that you're an original thinker. To me, it sticks out as something that people can actually do. I love you use a lot of carousels, and I love sort of going through and seeing like, here's another idea, here's another idea, here's another idea. And again, the bite-sized aspect of it, because it can be overwhelming to try to get into mindfulness, to try to be healthy in the crazy ass world that we live in. And I think that the accessibility of doing something small, reading something and being like, okay, can I do that? Can I change that? Can I say something nice to myself instead of saying something crappy to myself, is something that really is powerful, but you have to do it. So a lot of your stuff is about sort of taking this different action to create a different experience.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's very kind of you. And yeah, I mean, I think that if there's a common line of things that I talk about, it's action and it's doing. Like similar to what we were just talking about, how a lot of mindfulness is focused on listening and presence and stillness and understanding without action, without choices that affirm that understanding. What are we doing here? So I really, as an impatient type A guy myself, it fits me nicely to encourage doing and trying and effort rather than inaction and indecision and regret. So I really try to voice that in simple ways to encourage people to perhaps see their life in terms of chapters, and the idea that you could always start a new chapter. Past chapters are
Mm-hmm.
not defining. Like, we have these abilities that I think get lost on us as we get older, and we get more grounded in comfort zones and expectations. And then you've got the social media ecosystem just pounding certain narratives into you that
Mm-hmm.
you think are inevitable, and I don't necessarily think they are. So whatever way I could help people either break a pattern. My favorite saying that I say is, a pattern's a pattern until it's not a pattern anymore. Like, that's
Correct.
how that's literally how things work. So if
Right.
a single quote in a 9 quote carousel series on Instagram does the trick, then I'm so happy, and I feel very purposeful.
Yeah, it's like can there be an epiphany from something small? And I mean, in my experience of being online as well, I think that there really can be. And before I was sort of teaching and doing things publicly, right? I've been a therapist for 25 years. I didn't really know, will this stuff translate if you do it virtually? Will it translate on social media? Will it translate in a group? Like, I was only sure that what I did one-on-one with people worked very well. I knew that aspect. Can you do therapeutically sort of informed or mindfulness things? And the answer is you really can. And I was so happy to discover that, because this is the pivot to be able to reach so many more
Yeah.
people than you would. So let's kind of pivot a little bit into the book and talk a little bit about what inspired you to write your book called That's Bold of You. What inspired you to do it? And let's talk about who's the book for. Tell us.
Yeah, honestly, it comes from a lot of what we're just discussing, right? I spend all day, every day thinking about words, thinking in 10, 12, maybe 20 word snippets and phrases, adjectives, verbs, ways that we describe ourselves. And what I've realized from a lot of my work and thinking, and I've done 600 episodes of the podcast, I've spent a lot of time thinking, is of all the things in life that get in the way of growth, happiness, fulfillment, whatever, nice words we want to use, it's identity, it's attributes. It's saying, I am this way, I am unhappy, or I am too loud or too quiet or too this or too that. Like,
Mm,
we are so quick to prescribe identities based on experiences, and those could be from other people too. Someone who told us that we're a certain way, and then we've agreed that we are that way, and we've agreed that being too XYZ is detrimental in our lives. And I realized the power of our words, like, very specifically the words we use to talk to ourselves, the words we let other people call us that we then adopt as our own identities,
mhm.
is everything. If we could change the way we describe ourselves, we could change the things we do, and in effect can change our lives. So the idea of That's Bold of You is, it's a bold thing to reinvent yourself in face of the labels that you've been given. Too loud, too this, too that, too quiet, too bold, too ambitious, too difficult, too stubborn, these things. It's a very basic approach to mindfulness and allowing yourself to reinvent yourself, to redefine yourself. So a little bit of looking back, where have these things come from? Where have these assumptions come from? Tapping into the power of vulnerability. I talk a lot about why we refuse to be vulnerable, comparison, things like that. And then just, celebrating the parts of ourselves that through one reason or another, we've assumed are weaknesses and not strengths. So just a very simple approach, a lot of questions to ask yourself. I think
Mhm.
mindfulness is the art of self-inquiry, the art of self-Q&A,
Yeah.
and being really prescriptive with the words that we use, so that we can, to my point earlier, have a conversation back to ourselves, not just listening to ourselves. So yeah, I think I use the title That's Bold of You because I think it's a bold thing to do that. I think a lot
Mhm.
of people accept what they've been told they are, allow that to become their own internal narrative, and never get around to challenging it. I think about who I am at 35 versus 30 versus 25. I'm a completely different man every
Yep.
single time. And if I didn't allow myself to do that, I feel like I'd be kind of stuck in life, just kind of sharing some of my experiences with reinvention and, celebrating myself.
It's interesting when you think about how, from a therapeutic point of view, sometimes we have injuries that happen where someone said we're too much. Okay, you had a parent who said you're too loud. Let's say that there's this attachment to that injury because it's almost an illusion that it connects us to that person, or we don't want to forgive them, or we don't want to forget. And there's something so powerful about really, first of all, blowing up that notion, because it's an illusion, of course. That person doesn't, half the time in my therapy practice, that person is dead. Like, they literally, it's not
Right,
doing
right.
anything to them, the person who planted the seed that you're too much or you're too loud. And what we're doing is we just literally grab the baton And we just start bashing ourselves in the head with the same exact one that someone injured us with. And that I always think from a psychological point of view, in my experience, it's like change can happen over a long period of time, and change can happen in like a moment, in an epiphany, in a 12 word something that you read on Instagram where you can go, oh my God, like, wow, it doesn't have to be this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. It's like the slowly and then all at once phenomenon. It's like I joke with my girlfriend a lot because a lot of my posts is so funny to me. A lot of my posts are like, surround yourself with people who, or I love a person who, and then I will do the effort and the deep thinking of describing good attributes of people so that we can ground ourselves in standards, boundaries, the way that we interact, like more deeper things, but very, very lightly put. And it's funny because my quotes sometimes are literally as simple as like, I like people who are friendly, or surround yourself with people who are kind. The most obvious thing in the world, but I continue to do it because I will get people who message me and say, Case, like, yes, obviously I know that I should surround myself with people who are kind, whose kindness isn't a strategy, but it's a way of life. But you said it in this way, just with a couple words that I hadn't heard before. And it was light bulb. I heard it 100 times. You said it 101 and it changed my life. And I don't take credit for the depth of that, and I don't take credit for it changing their lives. That's obviously all on them. But you never know the way that you present something, how it can change someone's life, even as elementary as I like people who are nice. Like, say it. Like, it's so silly. I know it. I even laugh at it right now, but it does make an impact. And, that's why I do it. And then, yeah, to your point, it could help break a pattern or a cycle or let go of something that you've been holding on to for forever, potentially.
It's funny that you say that. It's like when you're out here talking about the same stuff, you talk about what you talk about, I talk about what I talk about, boundaries, blah, blah, blah. That before I was doing this for a long time and before I had people who knew anything about marketing in my life, I would feel like I needed to like reinvent the wheel. And like, I can't talk about that. I already talked about that as if me talking about it once. And through the process of doing this for like 15 years, you really realize how you can never say it enough. And you're not being ridiculous to repeat it. You saying, surround yourself with nice people, that sounds so sort of rudimentary, like duh, but it's not. It's literally not, because people don't even know so much of the time that they can choose who they surround themselves with, that we get to decide who is in the VIP section of our lives. It's not any mother effer should be in there. Lots of people just should be in the mezzanine, and that's just a fact. And if we don't do it, right?
I like that.
We're the only, you make the guest list and you're the only bouncer.
Yeah. And I mean, human nature too, like it takes a while for us to make decisions, especially different decisions. Like to the point of what you're just talking about, like, I've done the podcast for a while. I think I'm pretty good at it. Like there's a reason a lot of people listen to it.
Sure.
But if there's ever a piece of feedback that I get where people are like, hey, Case, like if you're open to feedback, hear me. And they'll say, Case, you repeat yourself a lot, man. There's like, maybe just cut out the repetition. And I'm an open guy. Like if you give me feedback and I'm like, that's constructive, I will take it to heart. But I honestly refuse that piece of feedback because I think repetition is essential. I think about how I learn and how I evolve. One time, 2 times, 5 times is not enough for me to remind myself of a truth. I need to hear it in as many different ways as possible. And I needed to hear it repeated. And I think I'm not too dissimilar from other people. So I'm big about repeating myself. I'm big about writing the same thing in a different way. I'm big about writing it in the same way. I'm big about talking about the same topic again and again and again, because we need that repetition in life to finally get ourselves to take action. I think there's a lot of value in that, both as a creator and podcaster and author, but as well as for people in their own life and, the choices that they make to make a change.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's interesting though. We feel like people are watching everything that we're doing, or at least I did in the beginning, where I was like, I don't want to be boring, and always over giving and making shit too complicated. And people are like, the simpler, the more accessible, the better. Clients will come to me, or if I'm doing coaching with them or whatever, and say, well, there's so many people out there. There's so many love coaches, or there's so many whatever it is they want to do. And I'm like, but nobody's you but you. Right? Like Case Kenny has his way of relaying these things. Are any of us reinventing them? Like literally, like I say you're an original thinker. I think that you are. But the truth is, most of the shit any of us say, someone has probably said somewhere before. Who knows,
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
in fact, a big part of my process, the majority of my content is in response to other people's content. Like what I tend to do is I'll scour the internet and someone will say, for instance, love is when you XYZ. I'm like, oh, that's a
Yep.
really interesting take. You say that love is when you XYZ. I wonder what I think love is. And then
Yep.
I'll write 10 quotes of love is. So they
Yep.
gave me the beginning part, love
Yep.
is, or life gets better when you, or a
Yep.
secret to happiness is. And I'll say,
Yep.
well, let me force myself to have this point of view. And then to what you were saying a minute ago, it's funny. I had a call yesterday with a book publisher, right? Because I'm
Mhm.
an author and I'm working on my next book, and we're potentially writing it together. And I was asking them, I was like, "Are you all wary about love books topics?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Why?" And they said because everyone thinks they have an opinion on love, and everyone thinks they're an expert. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I think everyone does have valid perspective, but the difference is, and how I draw back to what you're saying is everyone can think something, but the people who actually do it, they have merit. Like everyone can think that they give great, advice, but the people who actually sit down and write it and formulate it, it's
Mhm.
always valuable. Again, back to the idea of thinking and doing. Like I think there's tremendous value, especially online. A lot of people can think that they've got good thoughts, and they probably do. But it's the people who sit down and share it. I think it's always valuable, and that's why I've come
Agreed.
a long way as far as in the past thinking that who are people to share their advice. But I've also realized is like there's this assumption that in life, if you've lived through something, you've learned through it, and I agree with
Mhm.
that. But we don't learn because we've experienced things. We learn because we reflect on those experiences,
Yes.
and that's why you have to sit down and find a way to vocalize these things, whether it's as a civilian in your journal or with a therapist or on
Yep.
a walk and just marinating, or as
Yep.
a creator in a quote, on a book, on a pod. Like we
Mhm.
have to learn to reflect on these experiences. Whereas I think we have this weird assumption as adults. It's like, well, life experience, that's what makes you wise. It's like you can go through a whole lot of things and not have learned a whole lot. It's about
Oh,
it's
yeah.
about reflecting. So yeah,
Yeah.
big on that, obviously.
And I love that. I totally agree. You can also go through a lot of things and decide that it's everyone else. I remember being in therapy. I'm still in therapy, but I was in therapy very young. And I remember just really sincerely thinking, wow, if my boss just wasn't a jerk, if my
Yeah.
boyfriend just wasn't like this, if my friends would just literally, I had all these things that if each person in my life could just make those changes, everything would be fine. And obviously, I had a good therapist who was like, you know who the common denominator is and all of
Mm-hmm.
those things? Oh, that would be
Mm-hmm.
you. And
Yeah.
and it's an empowering realization, though, to realize that you can change your life.
Yeah, it's something I'm obviously so passionate about because I'm all about actions, tough actions, uncomfortable ones.
Mhm.
But it is an interesting observation because I've noticed a lot. I've written a lot. I've written thousands of posts, hundreds of pods, tens of thousands of words, pages. The type of content that people are drawn to, it's pretty resistant to that. People like to deflect. People
Yes,
like to say they are the victim. To be honest, that's the kind of content that does the best on social media.
I
So I really
know.
need to check myself sometimes between delivering what might be uncomfortable truths versus what gets the most shares. People like to reflect on the people who hurt them, where they can take a step back and say, this right here is the reason.
Mhm.
And not saying that they don't play a role, but people like the simplicity of being hurt or saying they're the problem. And I wish the type of content that did the best would be the ones that say, you need to make a change, you need to do the awkward, tough thing, but it doesn't. So perhaps that's where we are as a species, and that's normal, of course. I'm sure I do the same thing in my life. I love to complain sometimes. So it's an interesting observation, certainly.
I definitely see the same thing, and have to look at the data where you go. People love. They really want me to talk about trauma bonding, and they really want me to talk about narcissism, and
Yeah. Yeah.
these things have merit,
Yeah.
and identifying pain points is helpful, but staying there is unhelpful because again, if we stay in the identification of that victim position, there's no empowerment, right? If we are unempowered to change our situation, or we believe that. But I think that a lot of times what people are looking for me as a therapist, is they want me to give them strategies and tips as to how to change the people in their life. Exactly that what I wanted when I was 22, right? How can I get my partner to do this? How can I get my best friend to do this? How can I, And I'm all
Right.
like, let's look at why you want to get them to do it. Like, if we can focus
Yeah.
back on you, you can make those changes. All right, I want
Yeah.
to shift gears again and talk a little bit about another sort of mutual passion that we have is you've got your meditation and mindfulness, your DJ collaborations. Like
Hmm.
you've done this thing starting in 2020 to sort of shift this lens, um, and making meditation more approachable, combining dance music with meditation. So I just want to talk about this project and what inspired you to do it, and are you still doing it? And tell me all the things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the headline would be like movement is an incredibly powerful tool in your arsenal when it comes to mental health. Like I even saw this article this morning that was looking at all these different channels for treatment of depression, and dancing was the highest on there as far as
Mm,
whatever metrics that they were looking at to look at, treatment of depression syndromes, anxiety, things like that. Literally movement. So there's that for one. But bigger than that, like I've always loved house music and dance music, always have,
mhm,
just as a civilian, just as a guy who loves to dance and loves the structure of dance music. So yeah, to your point, in 2020, I started doing these mixes with DJs, like big name commercial DJs, Martin Garrix, Griffin, guys who are headlining the big dance festivals, where they would play like a 60-minute set. And in the intervals, and like, because dance music goes break, build, drop, break, build, drop. There's a lot of breaks, there's a lot of builds where it's like a little bit more acoustic and then it goes off. I would fill that space with my own type of meditation, more mindfulness than meditation, but just like to consider something. And I've been doing those for a while just because I don't think it's possible to be bad at meditation, certainly. I think
mm,
some people struggle with it
right.
because they're like me, ADD, they've got a million things going
Mm,
on. They would rather do something else. So I leaned into that in a sense. I was like, well, this is for you. If you want to get a mindful element while you work out or while you go for a run or while you go for a walk, or you just want high energy. Sometimes in wellness and mindfulness, people always assume that it's about stillness and tranquility and
mhm,
ambient surroundings. And certainly that's fantastic.
sure.
But again, I'm drawn towards a mindfulness that makes you want to run through a wall and change your life for the better. And I find
Hmm.
certain music, dance music, aids in that. So I continue to work with a lot of DJs and producers. But I was actually in Chicago last week. My girlfriend, who I live with here in Miami, she's a DJ, and we've started doing them live for people. It's kind of like live journaling. Everyone's standing, and I provide these kind of prompts that people consider while we play melodic techno music. It surprisingly works. The description might sound a little jarring, but music has the ability to get you in a vulnerable headspace. And I've always found dance music, just due to the structure, due to the emotion of it, does
Hmm.
that. So for me, this is just a passion of mine to do something a little bit different, to kind of zig when everyone zags. And anything I've ever written, I'm always listening to dance, house, something. It just gets me
Hmm.
in the right headspace. And if it does it for me, it does it for other people. And it's fun to do things cross industries. Like a lot of
Hmm.
times it's always wellness people working with wellness people, which is great. Don't get me wrong. But it's cool when I could team
Yeah.
up with Martin Garrix or Snoop Dogg. Like that's
Yeah.
to me, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to continue to do it more.
That's so awesome. And you're also reaching like another whole thing with the cross pollination of
Mm.
audiences. Like you already know
Yes.
that your audiences are seekers, that they're attracted to what it is that you're doing. To be able to, in the cross pollination of audiences, be able to turn on people who would never do it. But I find what you said so accurate about dance, that there's something about moving and movement. And I've always been drawn myself to physically moving my body, whether it's Zumba, whether it's whatever it is, because there's no possible way of being in the past or being in the future. When I'm dancing, I'm literally here now only, especially if it's a coordinated dance situation where the moment I'm thinking about what I'm doing after this, I'm messing up the steps. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Because you're
Yeah.
you're not
You're
you're
gonna fall
not
on
here
your face
now.
otherwise. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's so well said too, because that's my, like, when we do these sessions. So we did two of them last weekend and they're like 40 minutes. The first 5 minutes is me talking. And my whole spiel is that mindfulness is movement. Like most
Mm-hmm.
people think that mindfulness is stillness. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly that is. But I really do think, to exactly what you said, mindfulness is movement. On the inside, it's letting go, it's making decisions, it's finding clarity, it's
Mm-hmm.
growing. And then it's making choices in the world with your body, with your words, with everything. So
Right.
mindfulness is movement. Why not connect it with something that is literal movement in the form of music? So yeah,
Right.
to me, it's a natural alignment. And, it's fun to do it with music that you might not consider to be that
Right.
mindful, but it is. Like dance music, to me, it just puts me in my feels immediately,
Yep.
grounds me in the present, and inspires me to find hope and to move to the future. So I think it's a perfect combination. And then to your point, yeah, it brings in people who might not have considered wellness or mindfulness.
Yeah. And they're doing it. They don't realize that,
Yeah,
they're like,
you
oh,
tricked them.
I guess I can. I always say if you have like an ass and a couch, you're a meditator, because people have this whole notion of what does it
Yeah,
mean to be a meditator? All you
right.
need is a desire when it comes to
Yes.
mindfulness. You just need the
Yeah.
desire to do something different and a willingness to do something different. All right. I have a last question for you, which I ask a lot of my people. Personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle, and how have you overcome it if you have?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a boundary with myself. If that's an acceptable answer, I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm. I mentioned earlier, I'm very impatient, very, very impatient. It's a bad quality. It's one I need to work on. I think it aids me in certain things. It inspires me to just go and figure it out. But it also, makes me feel bad about myself. Makes me feel like I'm falling behind. I'm not. I struggle a lot of the times with I'm not who I'm supposed to be. Like, is this who I
Mm,
was? Is this who I envisioned I would be at 35 when I was 20?
right.
Well, I don't know. And sometimes I get in my head about that a lot. And I think it's a lot of due to this standard or this lack of a boundary I have with giving myself a little bit of space and a little bit
Mm,
of grace. I think I've really gotten better these past couple of years with that, with, auditing myself, saying, Case, are you doing what you say you'll do? Are you holding yourself accountable?
mhm.
Yeah. Then what more is there to it? We just got to
Right.
trust in the timing. So to me, that's a big step forward. Whereas in the past, it wouldn't have been that simple of an answer. So I'd say that's my boundary that I've gotten a lot better about.
I love it. It's really what you're describing as internal boundaries, right? And that is exactly what it is. How are we with time management? Do I keep my word to myself? Do I say what do what I say I'm going to do for myself and for others? Because I find a lot of people in my practice, they will keep their word to others, but then
Right?
they will not keep, their self abandonment is like in full effect in all their
Yeah.
relationships.
Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I spent a lot of time comparing the way that we treat others and the goodness we prescribe to others, and we do the exact opposite to ourselves.
It's
So
so
yeah,
true.
there's a lot to unpack there, certainly. But yeah, internal boundaries are very important.
They are. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Tell everyone where they can find you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Love chatting with you, and great to reconnect.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, it's just case.kenny on Instagram. The podcast is called New Mindset Who Dis, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And then the book is called That's Bold of You. It's available on Amazon.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. We will definitely do this again when your new book comes out.
Yes, thank you so much.